I've seen great managers and I've seen bad managers to where people they just felt miserable at work and they didn't really even want to come, right? Are you
Yeah,
making
sometimes
your
people
team feel
say that,
miserable, Brent? Welcome to the CNL Podcast, where we dive deep into the minds of IT and security professionals to uncover their experiences, challenges, and best practices in today's ever-evolving tech landscape. I'm your host, Cedric Lassant, also known as your cyber expert, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Brent Brown, IT manager at Highland. Thanks for joining us today, Brent. How are you doing?
oh, I'm fantastic, man. I'm so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a while, and I'm just happy to be a part of it.
That's good. That's awesome. I'm happy that you're excited. I've been very nervous since taking over the show. This is my first time ever hosting a show. I've done about 10 episodes so far, so I'm just getting into the swing of things. So some of the listeners that are catching this season, if you could see the progression, I see it. I try to I tried to get my background all nice and fancy, try to make sure I'm looking good. I got the professional lighting. So trust me, I'm excited just like how you're excited. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in the world of IT and security?
Yeah, I always wanted to work in IT and cybersecurity. Like ever since I was a kid, computers always fascinated me. And coming out of college, I actually ended up selling cars for a while. But
Mhm.
while I was doing that, I was looking for connections and ways to interface with people. And I eventually met up with somebody who was in the industry. He ran an IT department. And just by happenstance, he saw me running some SQL queries against our customer database. And he's like, hey, car salespeople don't usually do that. What the heck, man? So I was like, yeah, this is kind of a stepping stone job. And he ended up hiring me. And I ended up working in enterprise IT for him.
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's a great segue. Yeah, I don't know many car salesmen that are writing SQL queries. Was it like something you were trying to automate or data you were trying to pull or what was the reason you were writing SQL queries?
We had this software. It was a CRM, and
Mhm.
frankly, their interface was just bad. Um, And so it was easier for me to go into their, I don't even remember the name or what it was, but they had something that was akin to like J reports.
Mhm.
And I just was like, I'd rather type in some of the queries that they have instead of using their drop down menu because it was painful.
Yep.
Um, and I often ran them like for other people, like trying to pull certain like select client lists for email blasts and stuff because nobody
Okay.
else really bothered with anything further than what the UI offered.
Okay, awesome. So you would say basically that going down that whole path was kind of the event that pushed you towards this field, right?
I had intentionally been looking for a connection. I didn't want to be in
Mhm.
car sales my whole life. I said, I'll do this for a year to kind of tail in college out, and then, several years later, I was like, still doing this. But so when I saw the opportunity, I decided to be kind of aggressive with it and be like, hey, I do have these skill sets. You asked about this, but this is what I'm trying to do for a living. As this is what I'm doing currently is not what I want to stick with. So yeah, it wasn't that it pushed me that way, but it was my way to get it.
Okay, fair enough. So what does a typical day look like for you in your current role at Highland?
At Highlands, we're doing quite well and progressing in a lot of ways. My whole team, we have a small team here, but my whole team wears a lot of hats. For me, right now, we have actually just overhauled the system that we use for on-prem backups. We're making some changes to our privilege access management. So I'm kind of monitoring those newer systems that we're using. I go through backlogs we have for third-party email security. We have a SOC that we use, so I go through the investigations that they're reporting through there and see if there's anything that they flag that it will be notified typically if there's something big. But I tend to just check on what they have that's moderate to see what improvements we can make in the environment. Outside of that, we have a help desk that I try to help out with and stay grounded with. Yeah, we have certain projects that we work on with other sister companies or affiliates as far as implementing things like enterprise, like F&O, Dynamics F&O, like financial programs and
Yep.
stuff like that. So it's a little bit of everything. I think the most unique aspect of what I do day to day is the GXP system administration. We are an FDA regulated
Well,
facility, so
what's GXP? I'm not familiar with that.
oh yeah, sorry. So GXP, it actually stands for Good Blank Practice, X being the variable in there. A common reference in our industry is GAMP5 or GMP, which is good manufacturing practice.
Hmm.
So GXP is just the catch-all for the different departments, which you'd be abiding by certain sets of rules to be sure that you're compliant with things. So
Okay.
the system administration in that context involves doing the system administration for things like quality control lab instruments. So if we have a quality control lab that works with raw and intermediate materials to check them for different things, there's software that goes, and I interface with that too.
Okay,
So
good.
not just the usernames and stuff, but also the implementations for how the software runs, kind of being somewhat familiar with that so I can help the team troubleshoot if there's an issue.
Oh, that's awesome. So I learned something new today. I always love when I can learn something new every day, and I try to tell everybody you're always learning something new. I've served some clients kind of in your space, kind of in the pharmaceutical space. I don't know. Would you classify Highland as in that space, or I wouldn't say because it's all natural supplements, right? From when I was doing my
Mm-hmm.
background on Highland, wellness, and that's a big thing, especially in this day and age where everything is like cancer causing, or we find out years later it's killing you.
Yeah. Never like to hear that, the retro opinion on things. But I personally would say I operate myself as like manufacturing support
Hmm.
as far as IT stuff goes. You
Hmm.
know, the leadership for the company does want to take us in different great directions, and I think we're looking at different markets for growth and such. I'm not sure I want to speak on their behalf, so
Oh
I'm going to
yeah,
say,
no,
yeah,
you
we,
can
we
keep
are we are a natural supplement company right now. We're looking to grow. I view us as kind of like pharmaceutical manufacturing, if I had to put a label on it.
Okay, fair enough. So with being in that space with natural supplements, you're no different than really any other shop that's facing threats out there. Everybody's facing threats, no matter what industry you're in, right? So, what do you see right now that is the biggest threat to your industry right now, and how is your team combating it?
Well, right now, I mean, first of all, if you can find an industry that's not suffering from a lot of threats, and I'd love to go work in that industry. So then I can kind of kick
Yeah.
my feet back a little bit. But right now, honestly, with a company our size and the segment that we're in, I don't know if I have any like new exciting threats to bring to the table other than what a lot of people see. User awareness training is something that we try to focus on a lot
Mhm.
because at the end of the day, it's really hard to dictate what people click on. You can mitigate it as much as you can, but sometimes helping your users be aware of stuff is a step that you can take. We had kind of an outbreak. I think a lot of people did of a token hijacking attack
Yeah.
through Microsoft 365 and Office 365. That
Mhm.
kind of like spiked in behavior over the last few months. So again, with the user awareness training, we're just reaching out to a lot of people and say, hey, here's some signs that you might have known good senders who are vendors we work with that actually
Mhm.
have been compromised. Be sure, like with accounting, especially, if you're going by accounting best practices, make sure that even if you get an email from someone who you recognize and you
Mhm.
communicate with frequently, if they're doing something out of the ordinary, like requesting account changes over email, don't get lazy. Call
Mhm.
them, verbally confirm, and be like, hey, that's the policy. It's there for a reason. It doesn't happen all the time, but I promise you, the one time that you do have a hijack or compromised vendor, and they make a request like that, it's going to be the time that you're like, oh well, I know Cindy. I was speaking to her to years. It's probably fine. That's not
Yeah.
what you want to do.
Yeah, yeah.
So the user awareness training for stuff like that.
Yeah, most definitely. And believe it or not, everybody that I've had on the show as a guest, when I ask them that question, so similar question along those lines, it's the same thing. It's the human at the end of the day, right? The user, you start with the user because that's really your weakest link. The systems that you program, they're gonna do the things that you program to do. Yes, there's gonna be 0 days and new vulnerabilities and all that stuff comes out, but more often than not, it's the human factor that is the initial foothold for the attacker. Someone clicked on a phishing link, someone, called you up and fished you. And if I recall correctly, one of the casinos that got hacked not too long ago started with a help desk scenario, right? So it's like you're at the front line, so you can't get lazy. You gotta call back. You gotta find a way to authenticate those users, and at least 2 times, right? Something something you have, something along those lines to make sure that you're really helping the person out that you're supposed to be helping, and you're not helping a bad guy get into your system.
Yeah, something that I try to remind myself a lot of. There's two things that I try to apply whenever I'm looking at making a decision about changing policy or implementing something. everybody has their different frameworks. I like using the CIA triad as well as the principle of least privilege. So CIA triad being confidentiality, availability, and integrity.
Mhm.
And I like to focus in on the availability portion because I think it combines with the idea of principle of least privilege really well. In the idea that if you're controlling your environment, people have to be able to reasonably perform their jobs. But the
Mhm.
key word there is reasonable.
Mhm.
You have to interact with your users and make sure that you're adopting a culture that allows them to perform the job functions they need to without too much difficulty. Because
Yep.
you're always going to get pushback, but if you're making it difficult for your users to achieve what they need to by being overly pedantic with your security, you're actually going to be less effective because they will be more prone to doing the things that you can't patch. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
you can't patch people, but you can patch
Yeah.
servers.
Yeah,
Um,
you can't patch people, but you can patch servers. You can try to patch their behavior though, right? Again, like I said with the user
yeah.
awareness training, and when you,
Mhm.
it's that never-ending balance between innovation and user experience and security. Because sometimes, like I said, if you make it extremely hard for them, they're just gonna go around what you're trying to get them to do and go do it anyway, right? Because they're looking to not waste time, and sometimes it's just really taking that time to educate them on why we're putting in some of these roadblocks and why it may seem unreasonable to you, but there is a perfect reason for it. We're trying to keep the company from ending up in the news or ending up bankrupt or having to lay people off because we're now subject to so many different regulatory fines and remediation costs, credit monitoring, identity monitoring, all that good stuff. Because that can really hurt your wallet. And most of the time, even with cybersecurity insurance, I know a lot of people talk about that, but these insurance carriers are getting pretty smart with their clauses to make sure that, hey, if it's something that's negligence on your part, that you're footing the bill for it and not them.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and there's plenty. And I can't be mad at them for certain things. There's definitely certain things that they're starting to require,
Yeah.
like not that we weren't doing it, but recently our cyber insurance people are like, hey, if you want to stay carried by us, you got to make sure that any external systems have 2FA enabled. And it's like, yeah, I'm glad that you're requiring that. Of course, we were doing that, but like it's almost
Yep.
surprising to me that you weren't requiring that beforehand. And it's really good for the industry to be moving that direction of there are standards, there are expectations that we should have. We should all
Mhm.
kind of agree it's for the greater good. We all need to
Yeah.
comply with the basics.
Yeah, we're trying to bring everybody's premiums down. And back in when cyber insurance really started becoming a thing, a lot of these carriers, they were just writing policies, right? Collecting those premiums. And they weren't really thinking about, okay, if something happens, well, how much am I going to be on the hook for? And then a lot of these carriers, they were losing money hand over fist. So now they're actually doing due diligence during the underwriting process and making sure that, hey, is this house even stable? Like, is this going to fall down at any point in time? Just like how when you're doing you're getting an insurance quote for your home if you're purchasing a home or something or a car, they're doing underwriting to see how much is it worth, what features are there, etc. And it's the same thing with the cyber world. I don't know why they didn't weren't doing it at first because they just wanted to collect money. They just thought the bag was coming. But yeah, a lot of insurance carriers have been in litigation with their clients because they're trying to stiff some of their clients on some niche clauses that their clients weren't even aware of. And some of these places they'll just put it in the clause and they'll expect that you read it. And if you don't actually do it and you didn't read it, and then later down the line something happens and now you're like the fine print gotcha. And that's it. So it takes due diligence on both people's side, right? Because you as the person who's purchasing the insurance policy, you need to know that hey, your insurance company's really got your back. And what do they have your back for and what don't they have your back for specifically? Because you don't want to get caught blindsided.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've seen someone that I knew was going through an unfortunate event, and one of the kind of lingering fallouts from it was the arguments they had with their insurance carrier over, like, well, technically these were the routes of compromise that were taken, and kind of disqualifies you for certain dollar amounts in here. So we're not actually going to cover the entirety of blank event. And it's just like, that's the last thing you want. You want to, when you have something really bad happen,
Mm-hmm.
like God forbid ransomware,
Mm-hmm.
and you're finally at the end of that road and you're walking away from what should be the hard part of it, the last thing you want to get is a letter in the mail from your insurance company saying, actually, we're only going to give you 50% of that coverage because you weren't doing X, Y, and Z and you just didn't know. It's the last thing we want to see.
Hey, well, at least it was, if it comes in at 50, at that point you're just like, all right, if they really got me on this clause 50%, okay, thankfully, then zero. Because when the total cost of a breach, a lot of people just think, oh, how much money they stole or what day they stole, but it's a lot more than that. It's the time you and your team have to put in to doing the investigation, doing the containment, doing the remediation, right? Post-mortem, then also any lessons, the post-mortem lesson learned, going about and implementing those lessons learned. Then you still have, if any intellectual property got out, did you lose your competitive advantage out there in the market?
Mhm.
Those are some things that you can't even put a dollar amount on sometimes, right?
And unfortunately, some of the one of the painful things you can put a dollar amount on in our industry, when you're like with pharmaceutical manufacturing, is when you're regulated and you have an incident like that happen, it counts as something that, hey, you need to bring your manufacturing to a stop. And that
Oh,
is, that's measured in a very large dollar amount on an hourly basis. So there's that additional pressure of like when this stuff is happening, you want to get it done because hey, we're not producing right now, and every hour we don't produce is
it's money.
very bad.
Yeah, yeah, I know. And my listeners are probably gonna be like, "You're beating the Clorox and Colonial Pipeline references to death." I gotta pick some new ones, but with them being kind of in the manufacturing space per se, even though they're in different kind of fields, when they were down from their incidents earlier this year, last year, they were losing millions of dollars a day. So you,
Yeah.
you divide that by 24 and you do the math on that. I can only imagine that team's pressure, and I'm pretty sure they had to work around the clock. My dog's sitting over here crying, trying to come in. I mean, you can come in, buddy. Give me 1 second. Let me let him in
Yeah,
because
of
he's
course.
gonna
Of
keep
course.
crying. There you go. Go lay down. He wants to talk to you too, Brent. Yeah, he's crying. I let him in, and now he's like, all right, I'm about to leave. Um, but yeah, so how do you go about, building a security conscious team and culture there at Highland?
Honestly, I think I'd say, I mean, everybody's always in the process of doing that, right? You never really
Hmm.
stop learning, you never really stop adapting and changing. But I had I'll say the privilege of walking into an environment that was really kind of at the first steps of moving into being a potentially proactive team rather than a
Hmm.
reactive team. Um, and one thing I've been focusing on a lot right now is documentation recently. Making sure that we have enough documentation to cover not only what systems we have, but how they're operated, the nuances of them, how they're built, why those decisions were made. And then
Hmm.
on top of that, having a playbook that says, XYZ systems, if something happens to this one, we have a guidebook to go by and say, hey, if all the alarms are going off, this is the procedure that we follow. If I'm not available, if my boss isn't available, if certain key members aren't here anymore, you want to have that stuff available so that really anybody who's there to tackle the situation is able to at least get
Yep.
a lid on things. And
Yep.
I think
Yep.
that documentation is a really easy thing to get lazy on. And so
Yeah.
I'm trying to find good ways to make sure we keep it updated, and also it's kind of weird, but make it almost not fun to read, but something that's like engaging to the reader,
Hmm.
so that they are kind of more willing to be a part of it, as opposed to like,
Oh,
oh my
I
god,
gotta
my
do it.
boss is making me go read through the knowledge base articles again for this thing.
Yeah, most definitely. I can definitely understand that, and I can't count on my hands and toes how many times that I was told to reference a piece of documentation for to get up to speed to something or how to do something, and on some internal processes, and then I take a look at the documentation and quickly identify this actually isn't applicable. Like this is out of date. And it's like if something were to happen and that knowledge wasn't there, that person who has that institutional knowledge of how that process is done, then we're screwed. Then we're starting from scratch again. And that time that was invested in that employee that actually, did the work, it's now coming back again, and you have to actually redo it. And I definitely
Yeah,
can
you don't
understand.
want to black box test yourself.
Exactly, exactly. And especially when it comes to IR, right? So incident response, you got to have that playbook. And one thing that I think he's just working from dozens of IR engagements, you make sure your playbook is available offline. Because if you can't access if your playbook is like in Confluence or something, and like a locally ran Confluence on your on-prem or whatever in the cloud, and you can't access it, how are your people going to know what to do in those situations? there it's going to be off
Yeah.
of muscle memory. So make sure you have a offline backup too. Definitely understand, documentation is key because that's really the bones of the business at the end of the day, right? I forgot who said it, but a business without documentation is like a body without bones. Um, some one of the listeners will come in and tell us, but I forgot who said that, but I think that's a great analogy slash metaphor to compare that to. So, what do you believe sets a great IT slash security manager apart from the rest?
Oh, that's a super loaded question. Pressure on myself. I don't know if I would put myself on any kind of pedestal to say that I have the knowledge to be an emulatable person for that.
That's
I
fair
appreciate the
enough.
vote of confidence. I
That's
appreciate the
fair.
vote of confidence.
That's fair enough. But this is in your personal opinion, right? Like our listeners, they're not gonna slay you or come for you or anything like that. But we're just trying to see what, in your opinion, like what do you feel makes a great IT manager, right? Like one, I can tell you off the bat, if the manager's not actually someone that your team could communicate with and be open with, then you're not a great manager. Period. That's like one of my things, right? Because
Mhm.
I've worked with a lot of different people in a lot of different industries, and I've seen great managers and I've seen bad managers to where people they just felt miserable at work and they didn't really even want to come, right? Are you
Yeah,
making
sometimes
your
people
team feel
say that,
miserable, Brent?
I I don't think so. I hope not. I've had I've had the privilege to hire some people that I went to college with. That we get along well. They had a great talent. We kept each other's network, and they're still here. So hopefully, that people say they you don't quit bad jobs and quit bad managers. So I think I'm doing okay.
That is
Um,
that's on
I,
point right there. I hear
I
that one.
think communication, like you said, is a huge thing. It's just the willingness to your team has to know that you have their back.
Hmm.
You have to be available for them both professionally and to a point sometimes like a little personally. They have to feel comfortable being around you because it's terrible working for someone who's like imagine going you made a mistake and you got to go tell your boss or tell your team like, hey, I goofed, we need to address this.
Hmm.
It's terrible going into those conversations being like, this guy is going to be so angry and he might yell, he might react in a really negative manner, as
Hmm.
opposed to try and turn it into like a learning experience. And I want people to feel comfortable approaching me. And I don't want it to be just my team. I want the whole company to be comfortable approaching me and anybody in IT with
Hmm.
like, hey, I made a mistake. I need help with this thing. And, we're not going to judge them. We're going to say, we're just going to help you do your job. We're going to help you get to where you need to be at the end of the day. And so I think having that approachability is really important. And then for me personally, too, I like to try and be extra sure that I'm not assigning jobs to people that I don't know how to do. That's a pet peeve for me, and I know
Yeah.
it's a lot of pet peeve for a lot of people who may have or do work for someone that's like, you know, you don't treat me like you need me, but you don't know how to do my job, and that's something I never want to. I don't ever want anybody to ever walk away from working for me thinking that I was just discarding them, even though they were super essential.
Yeah, that's definitely something I can resonate with because I actually have been in that situation before where I felt like, hey, yeah, I'm just an expendable resource. The manager wasn't approachable. Just the communication just felt like it wasn't the same, as it was with other individuals in the company. But that's what you find your tribe, you find your people, and you find where you're valued. I definitely left that shop because of that, but definitely found my tribe where I'm at now, and it's been an amazing ride since. But kind of to switch gears though, if you had to give one piece of advice to other IT leaders that are in your same position, what piece of advice would you give them?
In all aspects of your job, make sure you're seeking to understand first.
Hmm. And
Just take a pause, make sure you're listening, make sure you're understanding where everybody is coming from,
mhm.
and make the human decision. I think it can be hard sometimes in any corporate job, honestly, to kind of lose the humanity, especially if you have a larger team.
Hmm.
But I think a really good leader is very in tune with what it is that their team needs to function, as well as just who their team is, and taking that moment to make sure you're seeking to understand anything that someone is presenting to you before making any snap judgments, before immediately jumping to, I've heard this before, I've done this before. Just take that 5 seconds, pause, and think, am I really listening? Am I really looking to understand what this person's saying to me?
Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the head there is just making sure that you're taking the time to pause and understand. Because sometimes, somebody might be telling you something, but in reality, you have to read or listen between the lines, right? Because something else, they might be having trouble articulating or conveying what they really need. And they may say some words that misconstrue what they're trying to convey at first. And if you just jump right in, you're never going to be able to get to that. So I think that's definitely a great piece of advice. I think other IT and security leaders need to make sure that they're taking heed to is you got to understand from it doesn't matter if it's the intern all the way up to the C suite. You got to take the time to listen to people and truly understand where they're coming from, so that way you can give them guidance to where they're trying to go or how can you help. So while we're on the advice thing, we like to get some actionable insights in for people who are just starting out, right? So, what piece of advice would you give to someone who's just starting their journey into IT and cybersecurity?
Never stop seeking to educate and like improve yourself. Always
Continuous
be looking
learning.
to how can I challenge myself? Yeah, how can I learn more skills? Because really, the way that I view opportunity personally is that everybody at some point in their life is going to get some sort of opportunity. What you have to do is be ready to capitalize it when it comes. And that was the case for me. It was going through the classes and the practice tests at the time for A plus, Net plus, Security plus, all the basics, making sure I was really solid in that stuff, so that when I had an opportunity to sell myself to somebody and say, hey, I can be a value add to your team, I was ready
Mhm.
to do that.
Yep.
So hand in hand with that also is networking. Get out there and participate. Find people online. Find people in clubs. If you're still in school, find
Mhm.
extracurricular activities that involve people with a similar mindset. Because some of those networking connections really will carry you through the rest of your professional life. Those people will always be there. As
Yep.
I mentioned, our web developer is a guy I went to college with, and I thought he was really great at what he did.
Mhm.
And after I graduated, later on down the line, we kind of reconnected, and I had an opportunity to, hey man, I could use your skills here, and it was a net ad for everybody. Love
That's
working with him.
That's awesome, and I'm glad you said that because a lot of the guests that I've had the pleasure to host so far has said something similar to that regard. Networking I think is the one of the most important skills besides the technical skills because that kind of goes in hand with the soft skills, right? People like to work with people they like. I at least just in my experience, right?
Mhm.
Nobody likes to work with people they don't like or can't get along with, or that person who's considered the negative Nancy, or they never have solutions to problems or proposing solutions. They're just talking about how it's messed up, etc. And then you said another great point where you prepared yourself. So when you got the opportunity, you were able to sell yourself, right? And one thing I want to make sure that our listeners and people who are just starting out understand is that Brent wasn't just chasing these certifications; he's chasing the skills, right? So that way he can show the value that he can bring to the table. And that's one thing. Like I got certification myself. I got some of the same ones you were mentioning, and a lot of people that I mentor sometimes they're like, "Yeah, I went and got this certification, this, that, and third." But then you start talking about Active Directory and whatnot, and they don't even understand what that is. It's like, uh, yeah, we got some things we need to work on here.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite parts about first getting into all this is the very first home lab that I ever had was on it was a Lenovo T420 that I bought off Craigslist for like 150 bucks. And I was running like ESXi 5 or 6 on it. And it was my first exposure to this is like way back when I first started college. I was like, I want to try setting up a domain for my home. And so I was actually running a domain controller in my home with
Oh, isn't that a
DNS and
laptop?
everything.
That
Yeah. Yeah. So it was a I'll be real. This is a crappy little laptop that I was running ESXi on, and I was like, I got to like allocate the smallest amount of RAM to all of these virtual machines that I can.
yeah,
But it was a great opportunity for me to be at home and be like, you know what, I can deploy group policy to myself, or
yep.
like I can, And then the stupid thing I did, don't ever do this, was I opened up remote desktop to one of my servers just on the internet, and I put in a little sim log with, I think I was running Snort at the time. And I put in the sim log, and I was just monitoring all the traffic that came in, and I wanted to see like how much I got lit up with connection attempts and requests and stuff. And
Mhm.
I let that thing sit on my network for like months. So just because I was like, you know what, I want to see what happens.
You got
And it
both,
was,
didn't you?
I never actually got hit by anything. I kept it kind of sandboxed, but it was really nerve wracking. I constantly had, uh, I had the sim log set up to text me whenever certain things would happen. So sometimes I'd be out and about and I'd get like this text message that was like, you had a successful port 3389 attempt, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my God, I don't have a laptop with me. I'm out at home. But
Let me go
I,
home. Let me shut this
it's,
down.
it wasn't the best way to go about learning probably, but it
Mhm.
was a really informative experience for me to just run everything at home that I could, even if it was on crappy hardware, even if I was doing crazy stuff. And it allowed me to kind of familiarize myself so that, yeah, when I did have the opportunity, I was like, hey, I might not have a lot of job experience managing a Windows domain, but I can
Mhm.
tell you everything about it. I can tell you what I've done with it personally, even though it's not in a professional context. I know how to do this stuff. I know how to deploy a GPO, and I know the problems you might have with certain GPOs, and I know how to do this stuff
Mhm.
because I did it at home.
Yeah, and I think that's a key thing is that even though that, hey, yeah, when you're going for a job, some people they feel like, oh, I'm a fraud. I can't. I haven't been doing this in the real world. But when you take the time and you apply these things in a home lab, that is tech. That is almost an apples to apple comparison in the real world. It's just minus the scale and size, right? But the core fundamental and concept of being able to apply GPOs is still the same, whether you're at a small mom and pop shop to a Fortune 10 company. It's the same thing, right? So just getting the core foundational skills underneath your belt, understanding how it plays in the grand scheme of things, right? And that's the one thing that I like to tell everybody who's breaking into the field is that you got to understand why you're doing the things that you're doing, right? Because if you don't understand how these little actions or methodologies that you're following is playing in the grand scheme of things, then you're no better than a script kiddie. You're just following instructions on a lab or something like that.
And I want to. It's a great segue to one of the documentation things I mentioned earlier. I've been when I write my documentation, I go by this thing I found online. It's the golden theory of documentation is what it's called, which is a play on words to someone's like golden theory of the universe or something. But it talks about the four different types of documentation that there are, and one of them is basically the why portion.
Mhm.
And I think it's just as important for me. So I have a whole separate documentation category outside of our reference guide, outside of our knowledge base articles, outside of we just hired you. What do I do? There's a whole
Mhm.
separate section that goes through key portions of our architecture to
Mhm.
talk about why we did it that way.
Mhm.
And I found that people who take an interest in the why behind those things, I think actually that is the good mark of someone, like a good IT person, is
Yep.
someone who they don't want to know just how to do something, they want to know why you do it that way.
Yep.
Because I've run it, I'm sure everybody has. I've run into both where there's some people who's like, I want to come in here, I want to hit the check boxes, I want to get this done and clean my hands of it. And
Mhm.
then you run into those people who are like, okay, but why does it work that way? Like, why does it do that? And that little spark of curiosity, I think, is a lot of times kind of a differentiating feature of I don't want to say just like a good or bad IT person, but someone who wants to really further their knowledge and go further in that career or even just doing that stuff, whether it's professionally or not.
Yeah, to make sure that they're actually engaged, like how you said. And I can definitely resonate with that because sometimes, even when with some of my team members, I can tell when they're not engaged, when they're not asking those questions like why this was done this way, or just any follow-up questions that would help them further their understanding. It kind of lets you know, like, they may not be as engaged or invested into the position or helping out with that said process. But when they're actually asking those questions, why? I'm excited to share that. And you kind of you touch a good point on the why because sometimes I've been in a scenario where the why wasn't captured, right? And decisions were made to change from said process, and then all hell broke loose. Why?
Yeah.
Because we didn't know why we did something another way. We didn't know we had contract obligations to do something a certain way, a certain commit, or whatever the case may be. So the why is very important to document, and I can definitely agree with that for sure. I mean, so when you're not behind a keyboard and helping fight cyber threats, what do you enjoy doing for fun, Brent?
Uh, I spend a good time behind the keyboard. I
I hear you.
I like to game. I game with some friends. I have some friends who moved out of state, and that's a way that we
PC?
keep in touch. Yeah,
Yeah, PC. Okay.
yeah. So I like to do that a lot. It's good.
Well, I was gonna say, what's your rig looking like?
Right now, I have a 4K 144 hertz monitor, and then I have a vertical 1440p ultra wide that I use for like coding and reading and stuff.
Hmm.
My desktop is a 13900K with 64 gigs of DDR5 and a 4090.
Oh, them graphics is probably looking crazy. How many frames per second are you getting on those monitors?
Um, it depends on the game. I try to
Yeah.
keep it at like 100 to 120 at 4K
Mm.
because 4K is kind of
Yeah.
hard to max out at. But yeah, I love to do that. I like anything that involves like team play. I used to play Rainbow Six Siege a lot. I still play League of Legends
That's my
whenever I find.
game, Rainbow Six
Yeah.
Siege. Rainbow Six Siege. I'm a big Call of Duty guy. Um, but when I'm not doing a Call of Duty, or I've played all the Tom Clancy's, like not just Rainbow Six Siege. I'm a Tom Clancy, all his video games. I'm a big fan of it. Been playing since I was a little kid. Probably a little playing some of his games when I was a little bit too young. I should have. But when I'm not doing that, I like doing RPGs, first person RPGs or third person RPGs, like God of War. That's like one of
Mhm.
my one of my favorite games of
You
all time. Like I only
know,
have the PlayStation for that.
I'm gonna plug in a really obscure PC game if I'm allowed to, but
Go
I think
ahead.
it kind of I think it resonates with the PC community well. It's called Deadeye Deepfake Simulacrum,
Hmm.
and it's a very strange pixel graphic game where you play a person controlling a robot chassis whose job it is to go into buildings and hack through their networks to find information. But you're also armed, so if you screw up, you can react to whatever happens. But the
Ah.
presentation and the dialogue and it's very strange. And I wouldn't say it's definitely kind of an R-rated type thing, but it's a fantastic little indie game that I recommend people. It's so strange, but it's captivating.
Okay. Okay.
But I
Okay.
want to say to save myself a little bit, I do things outside too. I enjoy photography. I also do I photograph the corporate events for Highlands. I do a little bit of videography. I enjoy the editing process and all that stuff too. So
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I just actually started getting into editing a lot. Like I'm doing the in-house editing of the show now. So, I've been trying to leverage
yeah,
some AI tools to help me out, like to remove some of the filler words. Like after this episode, I'll eventually I'm gonna load this up into the AI editor that I have. It's a SaaS-based company. I'll plug them. It's Descript. I love their platform. I just started using it and it saved me hours of time, like with going in and having to clip the filler words. Sometimes I'm saying lots of times, and it helps me take that out. And you'll notice when I post this, none of those will be in there. Um, there you see, there I go again. But I definitely do. I like that. I'm starting to enjoy the editing process. I used to do a lot of editing back in high school. You had to take TV productions. I took TV productions one and two. I used to edit my own highlight wrestling videos and send them out to college recruiters. But definitely can resonate with that. It's a whole art form in itself. Just being in that workstation and clipping everything up, trying to match
yeah,
the audio tracks with the video tracks, loading up the B-roll, the transitions. There's definitely I see why videographers they charge sometimes an arm and a leg because it's work. It's not just
it
pulling
is.
out the camera and recording. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So I definitely can commend those who take it on as a profession for sure. Well, other than that, Brent, I thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your credible insights and experience with us today. I would definitely love to have you on again. We can talk a little bit more about some more gaming and more tech stuff. It's been a pleasure. For our listeners, where can our listeners find you online? Where would you like them to connect with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I do need to update it, but I am on LinkedIn. I don't do much social media outside of that. I don't
Okay.
have too much of an online presence outside of that.
Okay, fair enough, and I hear you on that. You know, that's, especially in this online era, you got to try to disconnect when you can. But for our listeners, you can connect with Brent on LinkedIn. Brent, I actually sent you a LinkedIn request a little bit before our call today. So if you see cybersecurity guy it says hacker or whatnot, I'm not trying to hack you. You go ahead and accept, become a part of the network. But for our listeners, don't forget to subscribe. If you're brand new, don't forget to subscribe to the CNL podcast for more conversations with IT and security leaders like Brent. Until next time, stay safe, stay secure.